It is finished. It is finished. These are the final words of Jesus according to John's Gospel. I think many of us might assume that these words mean something like, it's over, or this is the end. But it is finished might be better translated as, it is accomplished, or it is completed. The sense of the language is less, that's all, folks, and more, my work is done, or I have finished what I was sent to do. Now, the four Gospels all agree that Jesus' death on the cross is the center of our story, but each Gospel has its own telling and its own emphasis. This past Sunday, we heard the Passion according to Mark. Mark's Gospel tends to emphasize the humanity of Jesus. Jesus cries out in agony from the cross, my God, why have you forsaken me?" And in the end, Jesus lets out a wordless cry and releases his last breath. In contrast, today, the Gospel of John emphasizes Jesus' power and divinity. In John's narrative, Jesus always seems to be in control, and the drama is heightened almost every way that we look. In Mark, when Judas comes to the garden, he arrives with a crowd to arrest Jesus. But in John, Judas arrives not just with a crowd, but with a whole detachment of soldiers. A detachment would be about 600 soldiers. Plus, the text says that in addition to 600 soldiers, the religious authorities also sent their own police. So we have to imagine a fairly large group of armed and forceful people. Despite being surrounded by these soldiers, Jesus is the one who seems to be in control in the garden. "Whom are you looking for?" he boldly asks. "Jesus of Nazareth," they reply. "I am he," Jesus says in the text, but it would be better to be translated as simply, "I am." Jesus is not only revealing his identity to this group of soldiers, he is also claiming the divine name, I am, the same name given to Moses by God at the burning bush. So Jesus is outnumbered 1 versus more than 600, but with a few simple words, he drives the whole detachment to the ground. The text says that when Jesus said, "I am," they all had to take a step back and fell to the earth. Likewise, when Jesus is brought before Pilate, you have to wonder who is really in charge. Pilate is the ruler in this area, right? In Mark's version of the story, Jesus is almost mute before Pilate. He hardly says anything. But in John's version, Pilate and Jesus have a lengthy conversation. Again, Jesus seems to be in control. "My kingdom is not from this world," Jesus says to Pilate. And then after the crowd has chosen Barabbas and called for Christ's crucifixion, Pilate says, "Do you not know that I have power to release you and power to crucify you?" Jesus replies, "You would have no power over me unless it had been given you from above." In other words, you are not as powerful as you think you are, dear Pilate. So who's really in charge? Who is the one with true power in this exchange? Even from the cross, Jesus seems in control in John's version. There is no cry of dereliction like in Mark's version. No cry of, my God, why have you forsaken me?" Jesus simply says, "It is finished," bows his head, and dies. I think there's a reason why we have been given both Mark's version and John's version of this story, and we have heard them in this sanctuary so closely together. Even though they are quite different in so many respects, they both reveal truths about who Jesus is for us and his significance for our lives. They offer two versions, but they testify to the same Lord. After all, the confession of the church is that Christ is both fully human and fully God, both at the same time. And the witnesses of John and Mark help us to see it. In Mark's telling of the crucifixion, we see Jesus at his most human. Jesus in his humanity knows the depths of your sufferings, our sufferings. Jesus in Mark responds to death and suffering in a way that we can all understand and with which we can identify. Jesus cries out in pain just as any one of us might. If you find yourself in grief today, if you find yourself in pain or suffering or loneliness, despair or alienation or condemnation, if you find yourself in the grip of sin, guilt, or death, the cry of Jesus echoes in your own cry today. Jesus sees you in the pit and climbs down into it with you. We need the human Jesus of Mark's gospel. We need to know God knows the depths of our human life, suffering, and death. But we also need the Jesus of John's gospel. Yes, we need to know that God knows our suffering, but we also need to know that God and Jesus can overcome it. That God and Jesus can redeem the worst of our lives and world. We not only need Jesus to climb into the pit with us, we need him to look us in the face and say, I know how to get you out of here. We need to know that the light of the world not only enters the darkness with us and on our behalf, but that the darkness has not overcome that light. That has been the promise of the Jesus story according to John from the beginning. Remember that first chapter in John that said, what has come into being in Jesus was life, and the life was the light of all people. The light shines in the darkness, and the darkness did not overcome it. If you want a subtitle for the Passion story according to John, that would be it. The light shines in the darkness, and the darkness did not overcome it. Jesus climbs into the pit alongside you and on your behalf. He came to enter the depths of our sin, suffering, alienation, loneliness, and death. He came to enter the prisons we've created for ourselves. He came to battle the evil forces that ensnare us. And the only way that he can get us out is to break all the way into our pits first. The only way to get us out of the pit is to climb in there first. And that is what Jesus does on the cross. He goes all the way in so that he can get us all the way out. That is what he came to do. That is the work accomplished with his final breath. It is finished. The work is done. It is accomplished. The light shines in the darkness.